So this topic might be a little bit lesser known if you haven't been in the weeds of One Piece scaling as far as Twitter goes and all this uproar, TikTok and all this. But there's a real debate now about who's stronger between Guernika, bowler head guy, and Lucci. And it all stems from this. So about a month ago, Worst Gen HQ on Twitter posted this, talking about Guernika is stated to be the world's strongest special agent in his Viver card. And I want to preface by saying no hate towards anybody in the video that posted any of this stuff. It's hard to translate Japanese to English, and there's a lot of nuances that get lost in translation all the time. And I'm not a translator by any means. But he posted that, and then Annie King, who's a lesser known leaker, also posted his translation of the actual Viver card, both basically saying Guernika is the strongest special agent, which would in turn make him stronger than Lucci, right? Because Lucci is one of the special agents. Now, keep in mind, this comes from the Viver card, which the Viver cards are supposed to be supplementary information. In a lot of senses, they are canon, but as of late and in recent years, Oda has less involvement now than ever before. This is coming even from Stephen Paul and One Piece Greg, who's involved with One Piece in some way. So even if you want to take these things as canon, they're never going to supersede what happens in the manga at any point. So manga feats, manga statements will always trump what happens in the Viver cards regardless, even if you use them as supplementary material. That being said, in the actual manga, when Guernika was first revealed in Dressrosa and he walked up with, his other two guys, Maha and I forget the other guy's name, they're called the world's most powerful intelligence agencies. Okay, so that's one instance where we see that it's talking about a collective when they were introduced. Okay, then we get this statement in Wano where it's revealed to us, by way of Robin, who has knowledge of these things, that the strongest members of CP-0, the most feared members, are mask wearers. So that is the next upper echelon. Now, in this Viver card, if you notice, they specifically talk about those mask wearers that were on Wano right there in the picture as well. Now, both Sandman, who is native Japanese speaker, one of the most trusted translators in the One Piece community, and Atur, who runs the Library of Ohara and is responsible for the yellow Viver card translations that everybody uses all the time, both disagree with the translations I provided earlier. Both of them say that no, this by no means would prove Guernika is stronger than Lucci. Sandman says, I checked the Viver card. It's ambiguous whether or not Guernika is the strongest member in CP-0. We're not sure if he is stronger than Lucci. And then he goes on to say like, hey, Viver cards, all the stuff I mentioned earlier about Oda not being involved and not even the editors involved anymore. Atur gives you a breakdown of the kanji and says it basically means an agent in the strongest division of the world. It refers to the CP-0 masked agents being the most elite, rather than Guernika alone. So as usual, I wouldn't put much thought into it. Atur's interpretation matches up pretty perfectly with what's stated in the actual manga. Now, one thing in Japanese is that plurals and singulars get mixed up all the time when translating because there's no specific differentiating factors in Japanese. So you can translate this to say the world's strongest agent, but it's just as possible it says world's strongest agents, and also with the context of the way the sentence is structured, it goes in line with it being the world's most powerful special agents, the CP-0 guys, especially with the masks. This guy sums it up really well with his interpretation of it, where he says that this makes the most sense. The most powerful special class agents in the world who serve as the sword and shield of the celestial dragons, they are the elite who, after passing through CP9, have become part of CP-0. Only the strongest are allowed to wear the mask. They protect the world nobles at all times, act as enforcers for their commands. However, their true identities remain unknown, mystery of their faces hidden beneath the masks. This makes a lot more sense, and those three specifically being singled out here does not take anything away from Lucci, because of course we got revealed that Lucci, Kaku, Stussy, all are mask wearers in CP-0 as well in Egghead. And just for overkill, ChatGPT's interpretation of this basically claims the same thing, that there's two interpretations you could take, one being the strongest special agent singular, and one being the one that we're talking about in the broad view, special agent of the strongest class. And the thing that kind of gives it away for me is like, even in like Andy King's translation or whatever, and that's kind of why I brought up the other guy's interpretation of what was said, it says the sword and shield of the celestial dragons. Guernika singularly is not the sword and shield of the celestial dragons. It is the agency. That's why it tells me that it is talking about the highest class of the CP-0, at least in my view. That's what makes the most sense. That's why I align with this guy's interpretation, as well as all the other things I've mentioned, the things mentioned in the manga, Guernika never being referenced and singled out in any capacity in the manga, only on the contrary. Even when the Gorosei talk about the events that happened on Egghead, they say one of our best agents. They don't say our strongest or best agent. You also have weird situations where there's a lot of times where it seems like Lucci could be potentially the boss of CP-0, where those guys are actually reporting back to him, it seems. We saw who the Dressrosa agents were. It was Maha, Guernika, and his other guy. Lucci gets the report. He basically orders them to return and do other things. And then even in Wano, He basically is like the conduit to the higher ups. Like Lucci's kind of the guy that gets the orders and he relays them down to other people in a lot of instances. Now with that said, we can look at the actual feats now, because that obviously would trump all anyway, so all this wouldn't even matter if the feats just directly contradicted. So a lot of people like to hang their head on Guernika intercepting Kaido and Luffy's clash. So this happened in chapter 1042 when Luffy and Kaido were both engrossed in the heat of battle completely. They're completely focused on each other. They're not worried about anything else that's happening. This is a phenomenon that happens in real life. Like, you block out everything else that's happening, and Guernica is shown rushing toward them. We have no idea when Guernica started his rush. We don't know if he started the rush prior to them even moving from their position, because there's a moment where Kaido hits Luffy with the block while Luffy's on the ground, and they start rushing toward each other. Guernica could already be well into motion by the time that they start their move. We have no idea the distance that's traversed. And it's hard to tell here because it's such a small picture, but the anime gives you a clearer shot where it's like Guernica seems to be underneath where the clash is going to take place and coming at it from the side. So a completely different angle. Like I said, he could potentially already be in motion, and then he's intercepting it there, so it makes it even more murky. And if we wanted to really get into this with a completely unspecified distance here, we have Guernica jumping in here. Then in Egghead, if we really wanted to like be talking about travel speed and fucking characters matching impact and moving at the same speed, Lucci matches Gear 4 Luffy from the same starting point, fresh out of Sea Stone Cuffs after getting his ass whooped by this Luffy, and impacts the damn Seraphim at the same exact time. And he does it not once, but twice, while in his hybrid form, which is weaker than his awakened form. So this isn't even his top speed or top output of power. So if we were comparing this is arguably a stronger Gear 4, and Lucci's matching. So even then it's gonna be a problem. So even if you took this scene hyper literally and were like, hey, Guernica's showing relative speed to Kaido in Gear 4 Luffy, he makes it to Luffy, right? You then would have to also, if we're going to bring in travel speed moments and moments of characters just reaching an impact point at the same time, you would then have to bring in Lucci's feats doing the same thing. And Lucci's would be on an arguably stronger Luffy with more consistency in a lesser form. So this would never work. Now, I think that all this impact point scaling is useless essentially anyway. If characters aren't getting feats in an actual fight with characters on guard, most of the time I discredit them. There's some exceptions, obviously. All we know is that he ends up behind Luffy, grabs onto Luffy, and obviously has no other result. You know, it ruined Kaido's fight. Kaido ends up hitting Luffy, knocking him out of the form, thinks Luffy's dead. Guernica accepts his fate. Kaido takes him out and kills him, but Guernica survived and actually shot the picture of Gear 5, but then later died to his wound. So he was alive. He barely endured to take the picture and died to the wound from Kaido's unnamed attack. We see Kaido gets much faster than this later in the fight when he's matching Gear 5 levels of speed with Death Destroying Series, all this. Luffy, of course, gets Gear 5, gets much faster, much stronger. Let's say that this was true and he got to, you know, a similar speed tier as these guys. He still wouldn't be in their absolute maximum speed tier, their absolute, like their full power speed. So he wouldn't scale to that like Gear 5 Luffy speed or, you know, serious Kaido speed. Also, this is never going to be constituted as a blitz by any metric. They're not paying attention to him at all. They have no idea that this guy's even a factor in these moments. So it's not a situation where they can't react to him. I've given you guys the definition of speed blitz many times, at least from Versus Battle Wiki, and that's kind of what I'm going in part with now. And it also would have to be a consistency thing. So by no means would it ever be a blitz. Like if anything, you could try to wank it to say like, okay, you guys have a relative speed tier to this clash. Neither here nor there. Let's talk about all the things that don't make sense with this anyway. So if you go back to Guernica, early parts of Wano, you get to these instances where it's like he doesn't look too bad, but these showings are certainly not consistent with any scaling that would get him past the Lucci. He was initially going for Robin and Brook. His goal was and mission was to capture Robin, but then like the flame spirit got in their way and burned him or whatever. So then he got knocked off his course. Then he gets confronted with Apu and Drake essentially, but he violently blitzed Apu, knocks Apu down. Drake shows up, gets prepared to attack Drake, and then Apu hits him with an attack. He's off guarding him clearly, so I'm not going to really hold that against him. He thought he had already killed him or finished him, or he was out of the picture, and then Apu shot an attack at him from the ground. Which, funny enough though, in this context, like Guernica and Drake are about to clash in the middle, and like look, Apu intercepts it with his attack. Now he is like, of course, laying on the ground in front of where they're at, but are we going to say that Apu's attack is faster than Guernica or Drake, their combat speed, because he intercepted the clash? And he's catching them off guard. Just something to think about. And this is a nice little moment where it's like, again, people forget that like these characters always use defensive arm in hockey, even when it's not shown. And this is another time where it's stated, Apu talks about having hockey and using that for defense. After this, I'm pretty sure this is Maha. Maha and Guernika step up to face Apu and Drake 2v2. We see that Apu's able to land an attack on Maha, but Guernika avoids Drake's. We cut away for a while, we come back, and we see Apu has started to run away, so we don't even know if he continued on with the fight or if he was just trying to, you know, use Drake as a way to get out of the situation. But we can maybe deduce that like the two of them just lost 2v2 and then maybe Apu just escaped after he saw that it was dire because Drake was completely unconscious, completely KO'd. Maha also takes out this giant, whatever the hell, and Apu gets away with damages. We see that Guernika seems to have taken damage. Now that could have been from Apu's off guard attack, but there's blood dripping down his mask at this point, and he does specifically reference that took longer than expected. Drake was tough, so context really matters because it was like, was Apu actually helping with Drake there? Or did Apu just leave Drake high and dry and he got 2v1? We don't know, but let's say like we give Guernika the benefit of the doubt that Guernika slammed Drake 1v1. Maha beat Apu and beat the giant by himself, and then Apu just got away from Maha. That's fine. He beats Drake, says he was tough. Maybe it's just he's giving praise to somebody. It doesn't necessarily have to equate to them being relative or having a close fight. He could just be praising somebody that was stronger than he expected. The problem really starts to come undone now, though, when he goes into his next fight, which is against Izo, where Izo just fought like a ton of the Beast Pirates, okay, by himself. For one, he's breathing heavy, but it stated that he was too sloppy against a large group, and now like it's visibly shown to us that he is wounded badly. He's fucking fatigued and tired. So Oda does this distinctly and purposely to try to like protect Izo as a Whitebeard pirate. Even in death, he's protecting Whitebeard's 16th commanders and shit from looking bad. So Izo comes over here heavily damaged, heavily fatigued, and faces off with both Maha and Guernika, where Guernika basically respects Izo to the point where he was like, all right, hey, look, I didn't know you were going to be here. You know, we can just have an agreement. We never saw each other today. The Whitebeard pirates committed historic crimes. Given our position, we really shouldn't be letting this slide. We really shouldn't be letting you run free, but we're here to deal with only the Straw Hats today. We have other business. So we're going to just let this slide, essentially. So he wasn't too keen on fighting with Izo. Izo then says, no, we do it now. And we cut away. So we don't know what happens here, but when we cut back, it's like a whole situation where we see that fucking Guernika was knocked down by Izo, and Maha like runs in for the save, and then like Maha and Izo like fucking just double KO each other. They take each other out, they smoke each other. So it's like, depending on the interpretation you take, like we don't know how long this lasted, but if this is like a 2v1 where Izo like held his own against these two and then took out one of them and knocked Guernika down, like that's a terrible look for Guernika. Now, one interpretation you could potentially take is like the last panel you saw before that was Izo say, hey, we're gonna do it now. And technically speaking, like Guernika was already like passing where Izo was. And like Maha was clearly like behind Guernika. Might be a scenario where Izo snuck Guernika. Like, I'm just trying to do damage control to give him the best possible chance. Where Izo snuck Guernika, knocked him down, and then like all in one encounter, one exchange, like Maha and Izo just fucking, you know, took each other out. That'd be the best to save face for him. But the funny thing about that is that the anime, when they adapted this scene, they straight up made it a 2v1 where Guernika just got fucking sent to the ground at a point and fucking Maha and Izo just fought. So whether or not you want to take that as credible, given that none of the events take place in the manga, it would be kind of supplementary. This is either the worst look for fucking Guernika's character or slightly not as bad. Regardless, after this, we see he now looks to be bleeding from his mouth. He then gets the call that the elders want him to intervene with Kaido and Luffy's fight. While he's on the phone, Drake sneaks him, stabs him in the back. Now, in fairness, after this, he basically just like destroys Drake. Like, this is a pretty violent blitz. Drake has his sword in Guernika, and Guernika like phases out of it, uses his shave technique, and then like essentially one-shots Drake in that moment. Obviously Drake had a ton of damage beforehand. They already had a fight earlier, but yeah, he washes Drake right after that. Maybe you come out of this where you're like, hey, if you try to give him the best possible argumentation, like it's possible he got snuck by Izo, although it's not clear. Every scenario he's kind of in is kind of he's getting snuck. Okay, where does this get us? You see where I'm saying? Like, even if we went with all of this, we say that Guernika like is relative in speed to like a Gear 4 Luffy, and nerfed hybrid Kaido speed-wise, being absolutely generous and saying that he didn't have any downscaling or any anti-feats in these encounters because he was snuck. We still are left with him having a best one-time outlier feat where he had reached this level and then clearly was not capable of evading Kaido because he just accepted his fate that he was going to die. That leads you to believe he's not even relative in speed to Kaido to where he could get up there, get away from Kaido. You now move to Lucci, who has more consistency with the speed scale to Gear 4 and has direct scaling where you could say he matched Gear 5 in a punch using Armament Haki, and they equally were sent back flying from the clash. They're both sent flying into the buildings. So it was like an even clash. Now, you could say that Luffy's not obviously using a conch, which again really couldn't be proven, but it's most likely, we're talking common sense here. You could say that Luffy's not going all out, but Luffy basically says in Egghead, you know, everything he does serious. Everything he does, he goes all out. So I'm not trying to say hyper literally he has to be using like his strongest shit at every moment, but he's not like ever just not fucking trying. Like he could be using like less powerful attacks, but he's not like fucking just sandbagging for no reason. So Lucci matches this punch. Now, in fairness, this is the only instance where that happens, really, where he actually has any kind of relativity to a Luffy, because Luffy violently blitzes him, clowns him, toys with him. Every time Luffy sends a named attack, Lucci doesn't react to it. But you could make claims that, like, in a lot of these instances, one of which he's in the process of attacking Sentomaru, so he's kind of getting off guard there. The second one, it goes underground, so you could argue, like, it's not like a direct attack that he's not fucking seeing. It's just like, oh shit, this is the fucking goofy nature of Gear 5. Could argue off guard there. But even if you don't want to be a stickler on it, whatever, you know, Luffy just bullies him. He does react to like giant face Luffy chomping down. He reacts to Luffy shooting blocks at him and everything. So there's like a low end situation where it's like he can compete to a degree. But the biggest thing for him arguably is his endurance. He takes 3 named attacks from Luffy, hadn't even clashed with Luffy, and gets up like immediately after this encounter. Like Luffy knocks him out, Lucci gets right back up, and then continues on to go fight with Seraphim, go fight with Zoro, where he was able to keep up with Zoro for a while before getting blitzed and finished. Even after taking Zoro, a named attack from him, he still walked out of Egghead under his own power. His endurance is elite with the Awakened Zone, especially given that, you know, they have the enhanced recovery speed, resilience, all these things that Guernika does not possess. So if we were to take a battle of fucking outlier feats, Lucci's outlier feat would greatly surpass Guernika's outlier feat. Where Guernika goes over there, and if you want to argue relativity and speed to Gear 4 and fucking nerfed Kaido, you could argue that Lucci gets the relativity and speed to fucking Gear 5, which surpasses that. So it's going to be a better feat from that lens. The scaling with Zoro is obviously much better than anything Izo's bringing to the table. So at the end of the day, like, I don't think that this is really a debate at all. I think that people just ran with a statement that was misinterpreted. This happens with the Admiral statements as well. People think that it says that Akiji was the strongest man in Navy HQ. It's not what it says. It just says Akiji's the highest force, which is what they always say. Every Admiral gets the same kind of kanji translation where it's like highest force, the Navy's highest force. So this happens all the time. Things get lost in translation. Lucci's feats are better. He's stronger than Guernika, and I would say like Lucci probably mid diffs this guy. It might be like a mid to high diff, like if we're wanking Guernika, but even then it's like whatever. Lucci's definitely clearer than this. Make sure to like the video, subscribe. More content like this is on the way.